Ladies and gentlemen, imagine for a moment a woman, perhaps someone you know, perhaps a part of yourself that finds herself without a friend, not by choice, but by circumstance, perhaps even by the quiet erosion of time. No one to call upon in the quiet hours of the evening, no one to share her thoughts with, no one to laugh with. A woman with no friend. Friendship, as we commonly understand it, is often seen as something external to us, something we seek out and cultivate in others. It's a bond that seems to arise from shared experiences, mutual understanding, and emotional resonance. But if we peel back the layers of what we consider to be friendship, we begin to realize that the nature of this relationship is far more complex and perhaps more elusive than we first imagined. At its core, friendship is not merely the exchange of words or shared activities, but a deeper alignment between two souls. It is a meeting of minds, yes, but more importantly, it is a meeting of energies, a recognition of the unspoken that flows beneath the surface. True friendship is not born out of obligation or convenience, but from an authentic recognition of one's own self in the other. It is as if, in the presence of another, we are momentarily reminded of who we really are. But this recognition can be fleeting, and often it is clouded by the projections we place onto others. We look to our friends to fulfill certain needs, to provide us with comfort, to mirror our beliefs, or to affirm our self-worth. In doing so, we may forget that friendship is not about dependency or possession, but about two beings coming together to witness the unfolding of one another's life. It is not an exchange of gifts or promises, but an exchange of presence, of simply being with each other in a way that allows both to feel seen and understood. In many ways, we could say that true friendship transcends the ego. The ego, that voice within us that constantly compares, judges, and desires, is often the very thing that limits the depth of our connections with others. When we are caught in the grip of the ego, we seek friendships that serve our needs, that bolster our sense of identity, or that make us feel safe. But the essence of friendship, if we allow it to unfold, invites us to step beyond this narrow focus on the self. It calls us to experience the world through the lens of another, to share not just our joys, but also our sorrows, our doubts, and our vulnerabilities. True friendship cannot be demanded or manipulated. It emerges naturally, almost as a byproduct of shared existence. It requires no force, no artifice. It simply is. It is a recognition of the beauty of the other, not because of what they give to us, but because of what they are. This is why, when we truly experience friendship in its fullest form, it feels effortless, like the meeting of two streams that flow towards one another without resistance. And yet we often expect more from friendship than what it can offer. We live in a world that places enormous value on productivity, success, and achievement, and this mindset often seeps into our relationships. We measure friendships by the amount of time spent together, the frequency of communication, or the tangible benefits they bring us. But in doing so, we may miss the deeper currents at play. For friendship is not about quantity, it is about quality. It is not about how often you talk or how many things you share, but about the depth of connection that exists beneath the surface of these interactions. When we think about friendship in this way, we begin to see that it is not a static thing, but a dynamic, evolving process. It is not something we possess, but something we participate in, an ongoing dance of energy and exchange. Sometimes a friendship may flow easily, with little effort required, and at other times it may face challenges and periods of distance. These fluctuations are not signs of failure, they are part of the natural rhythm of connection. And this is where we encounter a paradox. The more we try to hold on to friendship, to define it, to control it, the more elusive it becomes. Friendship, like all things, exists in a state of constant change. And people grow, evolve, and sometimes drift apart. But this should not be seen as a failure of the friendship itself. Rather, it is a reminder that true friendship is not about clinging to a specific moment in time or a particular version of another person. It is about honoring the impermanence of the relationship and allowing it to breathe, to shift, and to transform. In this way, friendship is a mirror to life itself, ever-changing, ever-moving, yet deeply constant in its essence. So when we speak of friendship, we must ask, what do we truly seek in the other? Is it companionship, comfort, or something deeper? Is it the need to feel understood, or is it an invitation to understand? For the true nature of friendship is not just about being seen, but about seeing the other with clarity, with compassion, without the need to mold them into our expectations or desires. It is, in its highest form, an invitation to see life and ourselves through the eyes of another. And in this seeing, we may discover that the boundaries between self and other, between friendship and solitude, are not as fixed as we once thought. We may begin to realize that the essence of friendship is not something we find in another person, but something we recognize in the spaces between us. It is a reflection of a deeper unity that lies beneath the surface of our separate lives. Loneliness is a concept that we often find difficult to face, and yet it is an experience that we all, at one point or another, encounter. It is an uncomfortable companion that whispers to us of our separateness, our disconnection from others, and often from ourselves. Society teaches us that loneliness is something to be avoided, a void to be filled at all costs. We are told to seek out company, to be in constant connection, to surround ourselves with people and things in order to escape the sharp edges of solitude. And yet, in this constant striving to avoid loneliness, we might overlook something essential. Loneliness, in its most visceral sense, is the feeling of disconnection, not just from others, but from the self. It is the experience of being apart from the world, of finding yourself adrift in a sea of noise and distractions without a clear anchor. It often emerges when we feel misunderstood, unseen, or isolated, when the world seems to move on without us, or when the relationships we form fail to fulfill the deeper, unspoken needs of our soul. But what if loneliness is not an enemy to be eradicated, but a messenger calling us to look deeper? What if loneliness is not simply the absence of other people, but a sign that we have lost touch with something more profound within us? When we experience loneliness, we may be experiencing an invitation to turn inward, to confront the parts of ourselves that we have neglected or hidden away. In this sense, loneliness is not a void, but a fertile ground for self-discovery. It is an opportunity to deepen our relationship with the self, to hear the quiet whispers that we often ignore in the clamor of daily life. And here we begin to see the difference between loneliness and solitude. Solitude, unlike loneliness, is not driven by a sense of lack, but by an awareness of inner richness. Solitude is the state of being alone, not because we are abandoned, but because we choose to be. It is a form of presence with ourselves, an act of being with what is, without distraction or external influence. Solitude can be deeply nourishing, a space where we reconnect with our essence, where we can hear our thoughts without interference and feel our emotions without judgment. It is not the absence of connection, but a redefinition of it, an invitation to connect with the most authentic parts of ourselves. In solitude, there is space to breathe, to reflect, to simply be. The busy world fades away, and in its place we encounter a deeper sense of peace. Solitude allows us to sit with the totality of our being, to experience both the light and the dark parts of ourselves. It can be a place where creativity blooms, where insight arises, and where we can hear our own inner voice more clearly. In solitude, there is no need to explain ourselves to others, no need to seek validation or approval. We are free to explore the depths of who we are without the pressure to conform or meet external expectations. Yet there is a tension between loneliness and solitude that we must understand. While loneliness can feel like a weight, an unbearable ache that lingers in the chest, solitude offers us a different kind of freedom. It is not about being alone for the sake of avoiding others, but about creating the space to reconnect with ourselves. Loneliness arises when we feel cut off from the world and from our own sense of purpose, whereas solitude arises when we consciously step away from the distractions of the world to find clarity, to remember who we truly are beyond the noise. One of the great misunderstandings of loneliness is that we often believe it to be an absence of others, when in fact it is often an absence of connection with the self. We might surround ourselves with people and still feel isolated because the connection we seek is not with others, but with our own depths. We long for the kind of understanding that only we can give ourselves, the kind that comes when we sit quietly with our own thoughts, when we cease our frantic searching, and simply allow ourselves to be. In this way, loneliness can be seen as a sign of disconnection from our inner selves, and it is only in solitude that we can begin to bridge that gap. There is a beautiful paradox in this understanding. The more we learn to be at peace with our own company, the less we will feel the sting of loneliness. When we are comfortable with our solitude, we no longer feel incomplete without the presence of others. We become more whole, more grounded in who we are. And in this groundedness, we are more able to offer ourselves fully in our relationships with others, because we are no longer seeking completion from them, but offering our presence as a gift. Solitude, then, is not a retreat from the world, but a return to it with greater clarity. It is a way of recalibrating, of realigning ourselves with the truth of who we are. It is a practice that invites us to let go of our dependencies on external validation and allows us to reconnect with the deeper rhythms of life. It teaches us that the answers we seek, the peace we desire, and the love we long for are already within us, waiting to be discovered in the stillness. In solitude, we may come to realize that loneliness, too, is a natural part of the human experience, one that can offer us profound lessons. Rather than seeing it as something to be feared, we can embrace it as an invitation to explore the vast inner landscape of our being. Through the lens of solitude, loneliness can be transformed from a source of pain into a doorway to transformation, a doorway that opens not into an abyss, but into a deeper connection with life itself. And as we deepen our understanding of solitude, we begin to see that the greatest companionship we seek is not always found in the presence of others, but in the presence we give to ourselves. Solitude becomes not a state of isolation, but a bridge one that connects us to our own inner wisdom and to the world in a more authentic, fulfilling way. Relationships in their many forms are often seen as mirrors in which we reflect upon ourselves. But this reflection is not always straightforward or clear. It is not always the image we want to see, nor is it always the image that is truly there. The relationships, whether with family, friends, lovers, or colleagues, function as reflections of the dynamics that unfold within us, our needs, our fears, our desires, and perhaps most powerfully, our unresolved conflicts and inner contradictions. When we encounter another person, we do not meet them as they are, but as we are. Our perception of them is shaped by the lens through which we view the world, the stories we tell ourselves about who we are, who they are, and how we fit together. And so the relationship becomes a mirror, not just of the other person, but of our own inner landscape. We see in others the aspects of ourselves that we may not yet fully understand, or perhaps wish to avoid. Sometimes the reflections are comforting. They affirm our sense of identity, our worldview, our place in the world. At other times they are unsettling, revealing parts of ourselves that are shadowed, hidden, or painful to confront. In this sense, relationships are not merely about connecting with another person, but about the deeper work of connecting with ourselves through the other. The way we relate to those around us reflects the way we relate to ourselves. If we find ourselves in conflict with others, it may not always be because of the other person's actions or behaviors, but because of unresolved issues within us. If we find ourselves drawn to people who trigger feelings of inadequacy, jealousy, or frustration, it may be because these emotions are already present within us, waiting to be acknowledged and understood. The people we are closest to often act as mirrors that magnify our own self-perceptions, both positive and negative. A friend who praises us may reflect back to us an image of ourselves as capable, successful, or loved. In the same way, a partner who criticizes us may reflect our own insecurities, our fears of not being enough, or our unresolved feelings of inadequacy. Sometimes these reflections are distorted by the lens of our past experiences, our unresolved emotional wounds, or our own projections. We may see in others qualities that are not actually present, or we may fail to see the full depth of their character, because we are too wrapped up in our own stories and judgments. But there is a deeper and more subtle aspect to this mirroring process. The people who challenge us most, those who irritate, frustrate, or disappoint us, are often the ones who hold the greatest lessons for our own growth. These individuals, whether intentionally or unintentionally, act as mirrors that reflect not only the aspects of ourselves we are aware of, but also the aspects we may not want to acknowledge. They hold up a mirror to our fears, our biases, our insecurities, and our unhealed wounds. And in doing so, they offer us a chance to see ourselves more clearly, to become more aware of the parts of ourselves that have been hidden or repressed. This process of mirroring can be uncomfortable. It is easy to project our dissatisfaction, disappointment, or anger onto others, blaming them for the way we feel. Yet if we can look past our initial reactions, we may begin to see that the discomfort is not caused by the other person, but by something within ourselves. Perhaps we are projecting our own fears, our own unmet needs, or our own unhealed pain onto them. Perhaps we are looking for something from the other that we cannot give ourselves. In this sense, every relationship, every interaction becomes an opportunity to examine what is happening within us, to confront the parts of ourselves that remain unresolved. But relationships can also reflect back our growth, our evolution. As we evolve and change, so too do our relationships. If we are engaged in deep self-work, if we are committed to personal growth, we will begin to see the ways in which our relationships transform. People who once triggered us may no longer hold the same power over our emotions, because we have learned to understand and integrate the lessons they offered. The mirror may shift, revealing a different version of ourselves, a version that is more accepting, more compassionate, more compassionate. The challenge, then, is not to avoid the mirror when it reveals something uncomfortable, but to lean into it, to recognize what it is showing us. This process requires a willingness to be vulnerable, to examine ourselves honestly without the need to defend or justify. It requires humility, the ability to admit that the discomfort we feel in relationships may not always be the result of the other person's actions, but the result of our own inner landscape. This does not mean that we should dismiss our feelings or deny our pain, but rather that we should recognize the opportunity for self-awareness that lies within these feelings. Furthermore, relationships serve as a mirror not only to our personal selves, but to the collective energies that we carry. The dynamics we experience in relationships can reflect the cultural, familial, and societal narratives that we are born into. We are shaped by the collective unconscious of our time, and our interactions with others often mirror the collective beliefs, values, and wounds that we inherit. In this way, relationships become a place not just for personal growth, but for collective healing. In the most profound sense, relationships are a path of self-realization, where the other person becomes a mirror that reflects the truths we must confront in order to understand who we truly are. The reflection may be clear, or it may be clouded, but it is always there, showing us the way. And as with all mirrors, the image is not static. It shifts and changes as we grow, as we change, as we become more aware of the deeper truths that lie beneath the surface of our personalities, our desires, and our fears. Thus, the mirror of relationships is a tool not just for seeing others more clearly, but for seeing ourselves with greater depth and clarity. Relationships in this light are not just about connecting with others, but about using the reflection they provide as a means of understanding and transforming the self. They are a space in which the boundaries between self and other dissolve, and we are offered the opportunity to experience the fullness of who we are in all our complexity and contradiction. Emptiness is a concept that many of us instinctively avoid. It is often viewed as a void, a lack, an absence. In a world that is driven by the pursuit of fulfillment, whether through material success, relationships, or experiences, emptiness seems like the ultimate failure. To be empty is to be incomplete, we think. It is to be barren, lacking the richness of life. And yet there is a profound misunderstanding in this belief. Emptiness, far from being something to be feared or avoided, is often the very space where transformation begins. The truth about emptiness is that it is not a void, but a fertile ground, a space where things can be planted and allowed to grow. It is in the emptiness that the possibility of creation arises. Think of the blank canvas of an artist, the empty page before a writer, the silence before a sound. Emptiness is not an absence, it is the potential for all things to emerge. And in this emptiness we often find the freedom to reconnect with something deeper within ourselves, something unconditioned and original. In many ways, our modern lives are filled to the brim. We are constantly occupied, constantly seeking to fill every moment, every space with something, be it work, entertainment, social interactions, or consumption. This constant busyness, this incessant drive to fill the empty spaces keeps us from being present with ourselves. We fear silence because it forces us to confront the truth of who we are. We fear stillness because it compels us to encounter the parts of ourselves we have long avoided. We fill our lives with noise and distraction because deep down we are afraid of what we might find in the emptiness. But emptiness, in its most profound form, is not something to be feared. It is a doorway to transformation. When we allow ourselves to experience the emptiness of the moment, whether through solitude, silence, or simply letting go of our constant striving, we open ourselves to a deeper level of awareness. Emptiness does not make us less, it makes us more. It allows us to be present with the raw, unfiltered experience of life, unencumbered by the layers of attachment and expectation that typically shape our perceptions. It is in this unfiltered space that transformation occurs. Consider how the process of personal transformation often begins with a sense of emptiness. We reach a point in our lives where the old ways of being, the old identities, no longer serve us. The things that once gave us meaning, our jobs, our relationships, our roles, no longer bring the same sense of fulfillment. We may feel lost, adrift, as if the ground beneath us has been taken away. This sense of emptiness can be profoundly unsettling, even painful. And yet it is precisely in this moment of emptiness that we are given the opportunity to reinvent ourselves. The old structure has crumbled, and in its place lies the potential for something new. Transformation, in this sense, is not about acquiring something external, but about letting go. It is about surrendering the need for certainty, the need for answers, the need for external validation. It is about standing in the midst of emptiness and allowing the old patterns, the old attachments, the old identities to dissolve. And in that dissolution, new possibilities begin to arise. Just as a tree must shed its leaves before new growth can appear, so too must we allow the emptiness to clear the space for our own growth. This is where the true power of emptiness lies. It is not a passive absence, but an active, transformative space. When we let go of our attachment to the known, we open ourselves to the unknown, to the infinite possibilities that exist beyond our limited perceptions. The emptiness is not something that has to be filled with distractions or possessions. It is a place where we can reconnect with our true nature. It is the space where we rediscover our essence, free from the stories, the judgments, and the expectations that we have carried with us. There is a deep paradox here. In order to truly find ourselves, we must first empty ourselves. We must empty our minds of the incessant chatter, empty our hearts of the fears and attachments that cloud our vision, empty our lives of the distractions that keep us from being present. And in this emptiness we find a kind of fullness, a fullness that is not made of things, but of presence. When we are empty, we become open, receptive to the unfolding of life as it is, without the filters of preconceived ideas or desires. This process of transformation through emptiness is not always immediate or easy. It requires a willingness to be with the discomfort of not knowing, of not having all the answers. It requires patience, trust, and a deep acceptance of the unknown. But it is precisely through this acceptance of emptiness that we begin to experience a shift in consciousness. We stop looking outward for fulfillment, for answers, for meaning. Instead, we turn inward, where the potential for transformation has always existed, waiting to be realized. Emptiness also holds the potential for profound creativity. When we let go of the need to fill the space, when we cease trying to control or define what should be, we allow room for inspiration, insight, and new ways of thinking to emerge. In this space of emptiness, the mind becomes a fertile ground for ideas to sprout, for solutions to arise, for new possibilities to take shape. It is the creative void, the space where everything and nothing exists simultaneously. In the absence of preconceptions, we can approach the world with fresh eyes, with a new perspective that is not bound by the past. In this way, emptiness is a transformative power. It is not something that needs to be filled or avoided. It is a force that invites us to let go, to release, to surrender. It teaches us that transformation does not come from the accumulation of more, but from the willingness to strip away the unnecessary, to clear the way for something new to emerge. The emptiness is not the end. It is the beginning. It is the space where the old is made new, where the known becomes unknown, and where the self is reborn. Transformation through emptiness is not a process of filling ourselves up with more external things, but of rediscovering the depth and richness of the present moment. In this emptiness, we find the boundless potential for growth, for creativity, and for a deeper connection to the truth of who we are. In the quiet spaces of loneliness, emptiness, and solitude, we find the deepest opportunities for transformation. Relationships act as mirrors, reflecting both our light and our shadows, urging us to confront and understand ourselves more fully. Emptiness is not a void, but fertile ground for creation, growth, and self-discovery. It is through embracing the discomfort of these experiences that we break free from the limitations of our old selves. In surrendering to these moments of stillness and reflection, we open ourselves to the vast potential for change, healing, and a more authentic connection with ourselves and the world.